Dan Moraine's biography of Kamala Harris, he notes that in September 2012, Kamala Harris was given the honor of a prime speaking slot at the Democratic National Convention in Charlotte, North Carolina. Speech that she was set to give was a humdinger, but it was never given. Right? She deferred to the Democratic National Convention managers. They provided her with a speech that was just filled with cliches, none of them of her own, none of them inspired. People in the audience stopped paying attention, started talking amongst themselves. She stumbles through a speech that is given to her. So what was supposed to be her big moment in the spotlight went unnoticed. It was terrible, and she rebuked her own staffers as if they were responsible for her decision to accept a speech that was foisted on her, and they weren't. So Kamala Harris comes from a tight-knit family made up of exceptional high achievers. Both the parents were communists and high achievers, right? One was an economist, one was a scientist. Her father was an economist. She doesn't talk much about her father. He's separated from her life when she was early on. Kamala Harris is very close to her sister, Maya. So whenever she has to choose between Maya and her aides, she always chooses her sister. During campaigns, Kamala and Maya talk several times a day, often be the first conversation of the day and the last conversation of the day for Kamala. They have an identical sense of humor, and they have an identical laugh. So they're both brilliant, detail-oriented, tough, and competitive. During her time as United States Senator, she irritated many of her fellow Democrats and career Homeland Security officials who felt insulted by her. She would put on this pugilistic tone in public hearings. They suspected that her thirst for the spotlight was part of a long-range plan to pull an Obama by staying just long enough in the U.S. Senate to get the credentials she needed to run for the U.S. presidency, and that's absolutely accurate. She was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2018, but she was already planning her run for the presidency in 2020, just like Barack Obama, who was elected to the Senate in 2006 and then ran for president a year later. So Kamala Harris would shirk her share of tedious work that made up the vast majority of Homeland Security Committee business, and she had a brusque and antagonistic style that jeopardized bipartisan efforts on critical security matters. And one former official says she was not well liked by the majority of people that had to interact with her. She was disrespectful, no matter the issue. 4 current and former senior officials from the Department of Homeland Security were going to come out publicly in favor of Joe Biden in 2020, and at least 4 of them decided not to after he named Kamala Harris as his running mate. Can't do it, some of them said. Something about the way that she operates. She's always about the politics and not about the mission. One issue that rubbed many people the wrong way was that Kamala Harris would decline to meet with people that Donald Trump nominated for the highest positions in Homeland Security. Said she would choose to grill them in public confirmation hearings with yes or no questions about complex topics that could not be answered in simple ways. So the Trump nominee's inability or refusal to answer these questions made for good sound bites for Kamala Harris, but they did little to provide the public with answers to some of the most important policy issues of the day. So Kamala Harris is quite happy to put her own personal ambitions ahead of good governance. And she did nothing to foster productive relationships between the Department of Homeland Security and U.S. Democratic senators. Right? One apolitical moderate in the Department of Homeland Security, Elaine Duke, says, I'm not the only one she didn't want to meet with. Right? She did not meet with any of the Republican nominees. Right? Her prosecutor-style questions in public hearings were more geared toward making headlines than collectively figuring out the best way forward, leaving Duke wondering, are you trying to glean information for oversight, or are you trying to indict? When you look at her public record, when you look at the hearings and the campaign, is there an underlying anger there? And will that help or further divide the country in moving away from compassion and more toward anger? So Kamala Harris has many personality characteristics in common with Donald Trump. She's one of the few Democrats to play Donald Trump's own game.